Ready.
All right, we're good to go.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so good afternoon and welcome to our December 2nd ACRC meeting. Today's meeting is being held as a virtual meeting in accordance with the Electronics Meeting Statute. The requirements of notice, access, and minutes are being met through electronic means. The public and media are able to view this meeting on the city's Planning, Design, and Development YouTube channel. So with that, today's meeting is going to be pretty informal. If you guys remember, we met in November and we discussed how the UDO, the draft UDO, does not include the continuation of this committee. So we gave you guys a bit of a homework assignment and asked you to go back and look at the projects that the ACRC has reviewed, and then to look at our current TOD standards as well as our ACRC review criteria, and then to take a look at the draft UDO section on the TOD standards, and just let us know if you think that there are any areas that we need to modify. Again, because as the draft is currently written, the ACRC is not being carried over with that. So today's meeting is really to give you guys an opportunity to share anything that you found as you were going through the TOD standards, any recommendations that you might have on what we can do to, if there's anything that needs to be added to that. So again, it'll be very informal, and then it's just a discussion opportunity. And then after this meeting, whoever has any suggestions, I'll ask you to email those to me. I'll also be keeping track of them as well, but it would be helpful if you could email those to me, and then I will share those with Laura, and then we will make sure that your feedback is shared with the Ordinance Advisory Committee. So with that, I guess you can start with Eric, because I know that he has some feedback, and I can actually share what you just sent over, Eric, so that everyone can kind of see it together. All right, can you guys see it's a PDF?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So Eric, I will open up the floor to you if you want to jump. If you want to.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Switch to my speakers. Maybe you could. It works. I think I could hear you guys.
We can hear you, Eric.
You can? Okay.
Yeah.
Good. So yep, I just went through the cases that we received, I think 2020, 2021, and kind of looked through what caused the projects to ask for alternative compliance, and I kind of outlined them section by section there. The first one being primary frontage requiring the prominent entrance every 75 feet. One of the suggestions I was trying to make was giving more flexibility when beyond the 75 feet, when the entrance is redundant to the use, or in the case that we encountered there, the one that I really remember was the apartment complex and the grocery store at the bottom floor. And maybe if we could work in some of the wording that if it is a redundant entrance, there is flexibility up to maybe 150 feet. But if this is the primary or the only entrance to the actual space, that it still would require to have that entrance in there. I think, the point I made back on that particular case was it is TOD, and to have 0 entrances into the actual use of that ground floor space for primary frontage in a TOD was kind of unacceptable for walkability and the spirit of TOD. So I think we could give some flexibility when it is a secondary or redundant entrance. But if it is the primary, or if, you know, there isn't any primary, we really need to stick to that. So that was kind of my point there. I don't know if you want to do one by one and have everybody kind of make suggestions or talk about it, or go through each one. I don't know. That's up to the group.
I'd like to go one by one.
Okay, sounds good.
I'll let somebody else start. Or not, if not.
Looks like it's you, David.
Looks like it's me. It's very interesting what you've put down, not just here, but in the other two when we get to them, because they're exactly the same ones that I've got down in a much less organized way on my scribble pad. And this one is the hardest one, I think, in my experience, to be really clear with a definitive rule, which is why we've got this situation where and you know, I remember the grocery store in Noda, where it was a sort of acceptable compromise in the end. So the way the new TOD rule is written should allow that compromise. I mean, that's what we've learned through this experience, is that we're trying to do two things. We're trying to stop bad things, and we're trying to allow good things that weren't written in the code, you know, like the little cafe, which we'll come to later, perhaps. And this one that Eric's done some, you know, great work here on, I found the hardest to find the best wording to allow flexibility. But as you say, Eric, there's a certain point at which you've got to say, no, you got to have that entrance. And, you know, so it's a question, I mean, so long as, I mean, maybe it is, you know, up to 150 feet. I mean, strictly speaking, when you're walking down a street and you've got a lot of visual stimuli, etc., whether it's 75 or 150, so long as the wall is not blank, I don't think that's a huge issue. Obviously, we want as many entrances as is feasible, but I think this is a case which I think you're suggesting, Eric, that we could relax the dimension a bit, but absolutely hold the line that there's got to be an entrance, and, you know, probably on the secondary frontage as well, because, you know, that means it's on a corner. And I mean, I think the issue often is, how clever is the designer to work between the, you know, the client or the grocery store demands or whatever, and the urban design requirements? And the answer is generally, the better the designer, the more possible a solution, which is why I would resist too much flexibility, because, you know, I've always had this mantra over my entire career that, you know, flexibility is often a synonym for sloppy design. You know, poor designers want flexibility because they're not good enough to do the job properly. So, you know, flexibility is a dangerous word. Obviously, we need it, but it's got to have an absolute, you know, firm backstop beyond which no flexibility for whatever the reason. So it may be 150 feet is fine. I wouldn't go to the wall on that. I would be okay. That's my 10 cents on that one.
I like the way Eric has it written. And I understand David's comments. So I think it's important to include Eric and David's feedback in the rewrite. And, you know, to David's point, you know, you can give away the farm if you want to have a nice solid design. So the 150-foot length, I think, is reasonable. So I'm fine with the way it's written and David's additional feedback.
I can write my notes up very briefly, just as bullet points, after the meeting. Because I got some thoughts on the other two.
Kirsty, could I ask a question? Did you guys look at the new draft, the UDO draft? Because it has the spacing at 250 feet.
No, Laura, I honestly, I was going through what we were having, and
TOD, yeah.
sorry about that, but yes, I have
No.
not gotten to that particular part of it. But going through the new parts of the UDO, just not the TOD and the UDO yet.
Yeah, and when I pulled it from actually another district, but I'm pretty sure that we'd kind of done that across the board. So I just wanted to bring that to people's attention, that that's what the draft of the UDO has looked at. That spacing is every 250 feet.
Okay. I have a question since you're unmuted. Is there any way that we could work on the, getting the entrance so we avoid, especially that grocery store, and having some entrance to the space, primary frontage, or even secondary for that matter?
I am going to say that I think we put that in here, but I couldn't find it when I looked. You have so many drafts and you've talked around it and so many, sometimes you're like, what did we end up with? I thought that was our intent because of that very issue that
Okay.
a
we just gotta
business
make
that
sure.
had frontage. So if not, and I can go back and I can't probably find it right now, but I can go back and get that answer. So you're basically saying if you have frontage on that side, for each business should have at least one entrance.
Correct.
I thought we put that in
would
here, but
completely
as I
agree with
mentioned,
that.
I'm not seeing it right now.
I mean, the significance of an entry, which hopefully would have some architectural emphasis of some sort, most entrances do. The presence of an entry is more important than the actual dimensions between them. So, I'd be flexible, 250 feet might be fine. I wouldn't quibble, but the sort of backstop that I was referring to would be Eric's point that there has to be an entrance.
Yeah, I agree.
So what I'm hearing is an echo. Sorry, guys. That the dimension may be okay as long as there's a requirement that each, at least business along there, has that entrance, which is where you guys ended up on that case up in NODA, right? Close to NODA? Or not? Or that was the feedback after that case, from what I remember from getting from you guys.
Yes, that's correct. That was
Yes.
the feedback.
Yeah. I mean, there was a sort of acceptable compromise with a bit of a fudge, but we wouldn't want to let that happen too many times.
Exactly. And then David, and I did speak after that, and given what the way it was written and the way that we positioned, the developer to the client, there was no backstop by regulation to require that entrance to the business on those frontages, right? And we can't have that backstop missing in that case and have that developer to client relationship pushed to that, because otherwise every time it's going to push to whatever the client wants, and that is not in the best interest of the residents of Charlotte and especially TOD.
Yeah, thank you. That feedback's helpful on what you guys have learned in this process.
Padma, was there anything that you wanted to add to that?
I actually went through like the November meeting I kind of missed, but I did go through the document. And I kind of am with the team, like, I can see where the difference is and why we had to make the customized like changes to fit the need at that time. But I'm good with the suggestions here.
Great. Does anybody have anything else on this first one, or are we ready to move to the second?
Moving right along.
Great. I'll pass it back to you, Eric.
Okay, yep, and I apologize for any background noise. My wife decided to feed the dogs at this moment in time, so.
Which the cat gets in on the act.
Yeah. So the second point is basically dealing with the parking deck case that we had, and I think in the districts of UC and CC, absolutely needs to be upheld. I think the suggestion that I definitely wanted folks here to kind of talk about was whether or not this should be allowed in NC as well, and just and Laura's take too as well, in the hierarchy of the different TOD districts and what would be more important between NC and CC, and whether or not there could be another allowance for the more we'd call it landscaped parking deck in certain circumstances. So I just wanted to kind of discuss that. And I don't know if it's changed, again, to Laura's point, in the UDO revisions of TOD. I was again looking at if you're pulling that up right now, the table where it's allowed, and usually the transitional district does allow or permits on certain frontages this type of situation. I believe the developer was asking for this exception in UC, which I agree should always be upheld as being the most dense district. And I just wasn't quite sure on NC-CC kind of relationship, those two middle districts come, and love folks' input on this.
This was the one, everybody will probably remember that I got a bit upset about this, and because I thought we should never, ever in a million Sundays have allowed this, because to back up a parking deck with a pretty feeble green space and mediocre facade fiddling in front of folks' front doors and living room windows on the other side of the street is just awful. I won't go back over it, but I mean, I thought this was exactly the kind of thing that the TOD regulations are supposed not to allow. And this was a case of alternative compliance under the guise of flexibility, getting away with a very poor design, just dumping the problem onto neighbors. Now, I mean, we understand that the parking deck on sites like this has got to go somewhere, but the design of the parking deck on that particular scheme, in terms of its plan, was the sort of simplest, And so, once again, situations like this, the regulations have got to hold the line against bad design. And so, I can barely think of a condition at whatever density that a parking deck with a couple of gestural trees and a bit of sort of decorative art is acceptable anywhere in a situation that might back up this generally occurs when it backs up on the edge of the site to residential development. That's the most normal condition. And if we're serious about Charlotte's housing stock, we've got to protect it from problems such as this. So I would urge that there are no exceptions, because I took a quick look at that design. Now, I don't have access to cost information or a million other factors that the designers had to deal with from their client, but you could redesign that parking deck and get a very thin layer of something on, I think it was DeWitt Street. It's perfectly possible. And I don't want there to be any loopholes in the code which allows bad design to get through under the fake notion of flexibility. So I'd hold the line on this, absolutely.
So David, going back to how Eric has written his requested for change, do you agree that this will strengthen it enough in the new UDO?
Well, I think requested change. Yeah, I mean, I would, just for myself, I mean, if I was writing this code, I would not allow exceptions to parking decks backing up against residential, on a residential street. Period. I just would not allow it. I mean, that would be my recommendation, which might be slightly different to Eric's. I mean, Eric might be, looking for a little bit, of flexibility. I'll play the old bad guy and say I wouldn't allow any at all. Sorry, no, this is too important for
so
neighborhood and other citizens.
And
so
Mary, if I could just interrupt, I think if we could pull up the table, it's and I don't know, and this is again, Laura, I could try finding in the UDO draft, but it's table 15.3.
Yes.
Because because there is where it's permitted, you see on other secondary limited access, permitted in TR under the boulevard. So I wanted that discussion that we should, like you're suggesting that maybe it's not allowed in any of those circumstances. And then I just wanted to have a discussion. I wasn't sure if it needs to not be permitted in other secondary, even under CC, as you see it there. So that's all I was it's more of like an open discussion to figure out if that is flexible as it is right now. And I know when we were working on it, that's kind of the idea in some places to give, especially in the TR, in certain other circumstances of the frontage, some flexibility. And that's all I kind of really wanted. I didn't have exact suggestion per se in this, but more of like a discussion that we could talk about.
Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to add to that?
Having said I wouldn't allow any flexibility, when you really think about, this is a very, very clear chart that is very good. The limited access, that's not really an urban street condition, if I understand it right, because you're limiting access to improve vehicle flow, not pedestrian flow, I presume. So that, if I'm right about that, then that would be the only condition I would think that you could have bunch of landscaping hiding parking decks. That sounds a bit like University Research Park in its old suburban form, so it doesn't quite fit a walkable TOD. So the 4-lane boulevard and avenue, once again, an old suburban 4-lane boulevard, that might be fine to have a big setback and a bunch of trees, but in an urban TOD condition, certainly wouldn't. So I guess it, as always, context is important, the location, because everywhere we say we want walkability, we just can't allow this. It's that simple, basically.
I think the challenge is that we're looking at the old TOD, and some of this applies more broadly to other urban districts. What I'm hearing, well, I have maybe not from the whole group, so maybe it'd be interesting to know what the rest of the group says, is that to add more flexibility, at least to the TOD, maybe you're not okay with. I'm not sure, but it would be helpful. And that maybe the biggest challenge, like the worst condition, not to say there aren't others, and I heard you, David, saying kind of an almost no condition, but definitely don't want to allow this across from like the residential that we had at the back of that project, across the street from that project. But we do have this condition allowed in, I mean, the condition with landscaping and so forth allowed on decks if you push the deck back in certain conditions in the draft UDO. So I don't want anyone to be surprised by that. I don't think that it would have allowed it, that the UDO as drafted would not allow it for this condition that you all saw the case for, but I don't want anyone to think that the draft doesn't allow it in other conditions, like along a parkway, for example, which is a pretty high-speed roadway. Many districts allow moving it back and putting in landscaping to shield the deck.
In the more suburban, still relatively car-dominated settings, that's clearly okay. Look, I mean, that's to my limited mind, that's perfectly acceptable in those situations, because we're not talking about pedestrian intensive environments. So, and clearly there's going to be still, for the rest of my life, certainly, loads of suburban settings where that landscaped option would make sense, because it's not going to be high pedestrian traffic. And so long as we hold the line in the places where we really depend on walkability, for businesses to survive and prosper, then, I'd be okay. It's bound to be acceptable in more suburban locations.
Yeah, and I would just suggest that everyone, when you get a chance, even aside from this meeting, take a look and see if you think that what we have in the draft is right or not, based on the districts. Because it's definitely tilted to, that allowance is tilted towards more suburban locations, but I'm not going to swear to you that that's the only place that it is. Because I'm looking at it right now, and it's not.
Well, I won't go on about it anymore. I made my point. But I'm happy to, read some more homework.
And Laura, just to be clear, that is section 19-5, the parking structure design options. Is that, and then the zoning districts?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it is laid out, the table is completely different from the old TOD. So just when folks are looking at it, it's a little different. And the only thing I would caution to David's point is, even in the old TOD, and I'm trying to decipher this new one, but in say like a TOD TR, that would be in between stations that happens to be on an old, you know, North Tryon or Wilkinson Boulevard or Monroe Road that is kind of in that condition that would allow a parking deck to dump out onto. I don't know if that's always the best case because it is, you know, a area that is transitioning, and you know there wasn't a rapid transit line and now there is, and it still is a 4-lane avenue boulevard, and we are allowing that particular case in an area that maybe shouldn't have because it's in that transition phase and we want it to be more walkable. So that might be a odd exception that would be hard to maybe capture in the regulations, possibly.
Because you have to try and define transitional, you know, because you're talking about trying to regulate a future vision. But I mean, you've put your finger on it again, Eric, that, you know, the Monroe Roads or the Wilkinson Boulevards, which are not pedestrian places now, those are the places we want them to become pedestrian. And so, you know, once you build a parking deck and you know, take your parking deck through any loophole, it's there for, I don't know, 30 years, perhaps. So it would set back the other larger ambitions. So this, I think, I'm sure staff will, well, I hope staff will sort of wrestle with this to try and capture the subtlety of Eric's observation, which I thought is exactly on point, about trying to protect the transitional future of roads like Wilkinson or Monroe.
And that's, yeah, that's why I'm suggesting that if you guys feel strongly about this, the best thing that you can do is give us some specific feedback through the feedback portal. Because I'm kind of hearing generalities, which are good, but I think the more specific, if we can get some specific feedback, because otherwise yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to hear more.
I'll after the meeting, I'll send out a link to the feedback portal. I'll
That'd
email
be
you guys a
great.
link to that.
You read my mind, Kirsty. Thank you.
Did anyone else have anything that they wanted to add on this? Okay, Eric, if you want to cover your next item here.
All right, that is the minimal building height, right?
Little snack bar.
Yes, the little snack bar. Yeah.
Love that. I want to go there.
Yeah. So that's why I wanted to make sure that the items like that, developments like that, could go through with less hassle in the future. So again, this is probably Laura. I don't know if this changes in the draft UDO, but maybe not. You could enlighten us if not. But some suggestions I had for this is maybe if it's not lot width of 30 feet or less, that maybe it's a square footage to capture those small lots a little bit better. And then maybe adding and or condition that if the new structure is a secondary building to the lot already, and in this case, that particular one, it was a secondary structure on that parcel. Also, the fact that it's densifying when there's more than one building on the lot like that, makes more sense in the TOD, that it's not, you know, or maybe even a lot percentage of building too as well. So we're not having a low 1-story building take up, you know, the primary space, you know, in counterproductive to density or adding usefulness to the lot. So love any other thoughts on this to make it a little bit more clear, but just a couple of thoughts that, you know, I had pertaining to trying to make this, you know, happen without hassle.
is there any reason we couldn't have an either or statement here? Lots either less than 30 feet in lot width or less than X square feet in area. That could be the one thing that would be a low building would be permitted. And then we might want to add something, because that little example that we looked at had a little bit of public space more or less in the right place, you know, that is on the rail trail. So something that could say a certain amount of public space, but a percentage of the lot should be provided along the most pedestrian friendly frontage or something like that. One stumbles for words, you know, verbally. You got to sit and think and actually write this out, as we all know. But what do we say?
Sure. So I actually pulled it up here. So we do have a provision that allows a minimum height of 24 feet for parcels that are less than a quarter area or a quarter acre in area. And that parcel was just slightly over a quarter acre. The 24 feet would have still been difficult for them. I think that they did propose a 17-foot tall building.
And they had to kink the roof in order to get 17 feet.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the
Chrissy,
height, sorry.
I missed this case somehow. What was it for?
It was a little snack bar, little walk-up cafe right on the rail trail, absolutely next door to that big office building that's nearly complete by Sycamore Brewing.
Okay.
Hawkins Street.
Ashton Apartments, I believe, is the other building.
Yeah.
And there is a pre-existing building fronting Hawkins Street. So it was the secondary building to the parcel.
Single-story brick thing fronting Hawkins and a little pocket of space behind that existing building fronting the rail trail. And so, you know, I think we all thought this was a really cool thing. So I'm less worried about in places like this, we're much more likely to get a single-story building. I think that's going to be yeah. There we are.
Yeah.
I mean, they probably got the 17 feet to the top of the letters or something because they struggled to make it as tall as they possibly could. Whereas it's a neat little single-story box.
Mm-hmm.
And so the height to me is not as important as making sure we've got frontage, transparency, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The sort of stuff that I guess would carry over unless it would needed to be restated in this condition. But, they were doing more or less everything right here.
Would you guys what would you think if it was a much larger building and it was this height? Would that be okay? Or is it because this is a small little building that this height is okay?
I think it's the latter. I think Eric, you referred to that in your earlier remarks, that we don't want a big flat pancake filling the site. At least that doesn't sound like a terribly good idea. Whereas this, and so one would want to make sure, perhaps put some limits, percentage of site area. This actually would make a useful little case study if one ran the numbers on this. Perhaps that already exists as part of staff analysis. What percentage of the site is covered by the building, et cetera, whether that will sort of give us a handy number or an odd number, I don't know. I mean, all I know is that just looking at the project, as we can all tell just by looking at it, this was a pretty decent thing. So it does make a useful precedent, and the fact that it's sandwiched between two massive, monoliths. There we are. That's great. I mean, that view doesn't, of course, give the the full thing, because there's the massive, I'm not sure what they're going to call it, that Portman, that double office building that Portman have got virtually complete on the old Terry Shook site, which incidentally was the first location of the urban design program about 15 years ago, right there. So, I think these little urban, this would be, I'm not saying this is the thirsty beaver of the future, but it's the same kind of thing. A cute little something sandwiched in between monoliths. So, perhaps, we should tell Mick Jagger about it and he'll come back.
The only other suggestion I just had that occurred to me is maybe it has something to do with frontage too.
Mhm.
Because it's a non-street frontage, that might make more, more of the difference on it. I'm trying to think if it was flipped or other conditions that wouldn't make that acceptable. Like, I don't, I mean, if somebody tore down the building behind it and, that was redeveloped, that I would probably want that to be taller, right? Because it's fronting Hawking, so I don't know. I think I would be all right with the frontage, as maybe a condition too.
Yeah, we certainly would want to make sure that any little infill doesn't back up to significant pedestrian space like the rail trail. And that's why this little thing got it right. So that, I mean, sometimes, when we were writing codes, we would, this is well known. I'm not telling anybody anything they don't already know. But we would look at really cute examples or good examples, and we would write the code specifically to allow that example as a way into the final code wording, which then got a little more general. But I mean, how would we write the code to allow that building, and then extrapolate from that? I mean, if I was on your team, Laura, and you said, "Okay, David, write me the code that we want for that." That's the methodology I'd use. I'd code that building and then extrapolate it so that it wasn't so singular.
Yes. Well, we've also heard this comment, we have that allowance for small buildings and open spaces. And Jenny's Ice Cream has been brought up. So how would something like that work as well? So same kind of issue of that, the height may make sense for the larger buildings, but smaller buildings, at least under some conditions, probably we need to relook at that.
And not using if it's not the primary building on the parcel, would that solve it somehow, or in a more general way?
The challenge is we don't identify a primary versus a secondary building on there. So I know what you're getting at, but size almost, it would be what would determine if it's a secondary building, if there are multiple buildings on the lot. And I say that, and Chad can correct me.
Yeah, no, I guess I was thinking that way, how you're using percentage of building per lot, right? For, neighborhood 1, for instance, right? So it's like, if the secondary building I guess it would have to be smaller than what the largest allowed percentage, but you're not doing that in other districts, correct? Is it just neighborhood 1 and 2?
The provision that we're looking at here is in our non-residential districts.
Right. And you're not doing a building percentage a lot?
Oh, the building coverage? No, not in these urban districts.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Anybody else have anything that they want to add on this one?
Yeah,
I
this
just
is,
have a
I
tangent.
think that,
Um,
sorry, David.
someone
sorry
else want
again.
to go first?
So
Carry on.
I think that I think we need to be able to accommodate a small business owner, you know, whether it's Jenny's or this little Paul's snack shop. I think that as we're writing our policies, we need to ensure that we are focused on that small business owner. I don't have the wording. I'm going to have to rely on David and Eric to come up with the appropriate wording so that we do accommodate those types of small businesses. We don't want our policies to be so focused on the larger businesses that we're eliminating the small business person. And that's what I saw whenever we approved that snack shop. He's just a small businessman. This is his dream, and he wants to do this, and he has this little plot of land, and this is all he needs. So I think being able to work within, you know, the UDO and the policies is critical to accommodate that small business owner with that dream. So David and Eric, I'll rely on the two of you for the proper wording because I think you're in the same thought process as I am.
Yeah, there is a little. I mean, I go up and down South Boulevard more often than I like, but there is a little, almost a pop-up coffee shop just south of Scaly Bark, and now just south of where Zach's Hamburgers used to be, which again is a little business that's popped up with a little drive-through coffee shop. It's a sort of suburban example because, you know, there's no pedestrian traffic there. But that's again a small business taking care, you know, finding a little boutique opportunity and breathing a bit of life into a pretty dismal part of South Boulevard. But so yes, I mean the small site urban entrepreneur opportunity is likely. I think you put your finger on a really good point there, Mary. That this is an opportunity. It's a profile for tiny scale development, which should be encouraged as much as a code can. You know, because you can't encourage behavior past a certain point, but you can certainly set up opportunities by eliminating roadblocks. So whether we can get something in, because a small building on a small site is very likely to be a small business, absolutely. Whether we should think about wording, I'd have to think on that because I can't do it off the top of my head.
I just had a thought. Seattle does accessory, I can't speak, accessory commercial dwellings or structures. Is there a way that we could have that allowed and that count as an accessory commercial structure instead of a dwelling unit, but a commercial unit instead?
That's an interesting thought.
So my understanding of that concept is that's in conjunction with a residential use. But in this case, we're looking at a TOD site where that's the only building on there. I mean, that's the entirety of that site, right?
I thought it was all
I
one.
think it's a different concept.
I thought it was all one parcel. If maybe Kirsty could correct me, or I thought that was one parcel with a second, or did they subdivide that parcel?
No, it was one parcel and they were just proposing to build a building that only had frontage along the rail trail.
So it's, yeah, an accessory commercial structure that's non-residential. So it's under like Article 17, 6 in the UDO, that would be accessory structures. Could that not count, or is that only pertaining to residential?
Well, in this case, it would be a principal structure on the site. So I don't think it would pick up the example we had because that is the principal use on the site. Is Shad still on or is he gone with this?
Well, I mean, it
Maybe it's
depends
gone.
whether. I mean, I'm still not quite sure I understand. See, they did not subdivide this into two sites and then propose the little coffee shop on the small site. It's still one site, so it is an accessory commercial structure. I mean, if that's the case, I mean, this is why, as a methodology, we always used to pick really good examples and code them and use them to drive the wording of the code rather than try and take the generic wording and wedge something in. So, I mean, I can't recommend that approach highly enough, to really learn from this and to, do what we can to allow this kind of thing. I mean, I'm thinking of it. This is an example in Birmingham, England, so it won't mean anything to anybody, but there's a big urban development with, urban square and office buildings with design guides and all that kind of stuff. It's called Brindley Place, if anyone wants to look it up. And there's a delightful little organic, wiggly shaped coffee shop just off the middle of the square, which, is completely counterpoint to everything else. And it's such a success, it features in Birmingham's marketing materials about what a cool place. And it's the kind of thing that heavy-handed regulations wouldn't have allowed. And so the more little quirky, I mean, even, I'm being slightly silly now, but, just take the Thirsty Beaver. How would you allow a Thirsty Beaver condition to develop? Because we wouldn't want to outlaw it, would we? We'd want to provide that opportunity for a creative small business person to do something.
And
There we go.
I don't want anything that I've said to suggest that we wouldn't want to allow this. I'm just thinking about how we do it. We wouldn't call it an accessory structure.
Okay.
But
I
I
mean,
think
would
we can
prefer
get
to
language
be
in there to make
expertise.
sure to allow these without the height that is in these districts. So absolutely, this is, yeah,
That happens.
this is, it looks like it's out in an open space, David?
Sorry?
Does it sit in an open space by
Yes,
chance?
it's
in
a
this case?
large urban square, surrounded. It's actually a pretty good development. It's right on Birmingham's canal system, and
Oh, yeah.
it was designed, as it happens, by a fellow called Piers Goff, who is one of Britain's. He's retired now, but he's one of Britain's more eccentric architects. And of course, I mean, he just did what he wanted to do, and because he was a name, he was allowed to. Yeah, it's right by the canal. I mean, the architecture surrounding it is a little bit heavy, and so I mean, you can see that it's a little green oasis. Now, that's a bigger urban scale, but it's a question of, how would we allow that kind of building? We'd want to allow it.
And we would allow it. The one hitch we might have is that minimum height that we need to go back and look at.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when do we not require that minimum height or require a lesser minimum height? And we can, Kirsty, if that comes back to us, maybe through even your comments saying they're from ACRC, that would be great. So I think we can make this work.
Because you get, both in our condition that we're talking about on the rail trail and in that Brindley Place example in Birmingham, you get the urban enclosure by the other buildings. You get the urban enclosure in Southend by, the apartment building and the office building. And eventually there'll be something on the other, more substantial on the other side, perhaps. So the little building, like the Thirsty Beaver, doesn't have a primary responsibility in enclosing space. It's the little weird thing that sits in space. I'm glad we're having a really good conversation about this. This is exciting.
Mary, I think you had something to add.
I think you captured it. David and Eric are going to work on the wording or give more examples. But, you know, I just want to ensure that that small business owner, we afford him the opportunity and don't, you know, code him out of the new policies.
Excellent point.
Did you have anything, Padma?
No, I'm good. Like, if you can share the document that once everyone contributes, we can review it. I can review and provide the comments.
Okay, so I think, Eric, that takes care of what you had. Is there anything else that you wanted to add, or should we move on to one of the other ACRC members?
Yep, you could open it up.
Padma, we'll go with you next. Was there anything in the draft that you had questions on, or anything that you wanted to bring up?
No, the parking lot was my only concern. I also, when we reviewed it, I kind of expressed my opinions, right? So that was my only concern. So I'm awaiting to see David and Eric's commentary there.
Thank you. Mary, did you have anything?
Yeah, just one point, and I probably missed it in my review, and it's probably included. But in our original Todd zoning ordinance, it's on page 72, Kirsty. It reads, if an alternative compliance is denied by the planning director, nothing precludes the applicant from pursuing alternative options through filing an appeal with the Zoning Board of Adjustments, rezoning to the Todd EX, or submitting a new request for alternative compliance. I didn't see it in the rewrite. So my question is, are we giving an applicant the opportunity to pursue either, you know, the Zoning Board of Adjustments or a Todd EX?
Sure. So, I believe what our goal is so we will have these updated standards, and if somebody has a design that doesn't meet the standards, that they would go through the Todd EX rezoning process. Right, Laura?
Or they could, if they actually met the conditions for a hardship, they could pursue a variance as well. And then there's the 10% quantitative deviation if they meet the standards for that. It's another possibility. But if it's something big, it would be through EX, as long as they qualify for EX.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. And then David, did you have anything to add?
Only one question for Laura just popped into my mind. Laura, how often is that EX option used? Has it been used much in you know, since the regs have been there?
I'm only remembering, I could be missing it, one EX rezoning. And Optimus Park, I think.
Over on, is it the one on Charles Ave?
Yes, yes. Have you seen any others come all the way through, Kirsty?
I haven't, no.
Yeah, we've talked to folks about one on Central Avenue. I don't know if it's been submitted. We have such a backlog on rezonings right now. Could be submitted, but it hasn't moved far enough in the process for me to see it. but we have seen that one EX, and we occasionally talk to people about EX.
So in
And
the,
we have broadened EX to being applicable to more districts in the future.
yeah, because I mean this sounds like a useful, controllable safety valve that once our committee goes away, perhaps there may get that may increase the small number of applications for EX, and if that's working well for you and for the communities, that would seem pretty valuable.
I feel very comfortable with the one that's gone through. They had a building they wanted to reuse, but also add a little bit to it, and we were able to accommodate it and got some additional green space and a commitment to retain an older building that could have otherwise been torn down.
That sounds good.
Yeah, I think it was a win-win-win.
Okay, well, let's keep our fingers crossed that precedent continues. I don't have anything else unless I'll try not to speak anymore. I just couldn't resist the question about the EX.
No, absolutely. Great. Well, this has been very useful. I appreciate all of you taking time to review, our standards, the projects that we've reviewed, and then the draft UDO standards. So I will take the document that Eric provided and I'll send that out to the group after this meeting, just so that you can have that. And then I will also include a link to the UDO feedback portal in that, so that if you guys have time and interest and want to go look through the UDO and provide feedback, that would be very, very, very helpful. We would really appreciate that. And then finally, I'll just end to remind you all that we do have a meeting the first week of January. Let me just double check the date. So that'll be a virtual meeting on January 6th. Mackenzie has already sent out the meeting invite for that. Again, I've already received the application. They submitted it a bit early, so I'm going to be working on the staff report next week. So it's very likely that you'll probably get the staff report next week or the following week, earlier than you usually do. So I will send that out. And then Laura, are there any next steps that you need? I'll send actually Eric included you on the sheet that he sent with his recommendations. Is there anything else that you need from us for the OAC?
No, I think, well, two things. One, the first and third item, I think I'm pretty clear on. The second item, I think the follow-up is for folks to go in and look at what's in the UDO and comment on that. So I don't think there's real clear feedback on that one. A lot of different, a few different perspectives, and like for folks to look at that. And the only other thing I would want to put in a plug, and then Kirsty, if I send this to you, if you'd send it out to them as well, we're having a series of virtual meetings on different topics in the UDO. So if folks want to attend and learn more, or if they hear about folks that are interested, or you have a network that you can share this with, we would appreciate that. We had the first session at noon today, but it was really, and we're having another session at 6. It's really, the very first session is a walkthrough of, are we doing a UDO? I think everyone here knows that. What's in the UDO? How's it organized? But we'll be talking about zoning districts and different parts of the ordinance and answering questions. And really the intent is for people to be able to say, I don't understand where to find this, or is this in there, or can you help me understand this section, so that people can comment on the draft. So we invite you guys or anyone else you know of that may be interested in those sessions. So please come join us. And we're trying to keep our presentation fairly short so that there's plenty of time for people to ask questions. And I say we don't intend for it to be so much of a debate of we think it should be this versus that, as opposed to where do I find this so that I can comment, or I don't understand what does this language mean on this page in this paragraph.
And Laura, I
That's
put
what I've got.
the link in the chat for folks to grab so they can pass that along.
Great, thank you.
And I'll pull that link as well and include it in the email. Great. Well, again, we appreciate all of your input today, and I will shoot out an email shortly. And feel free to reach out if you guys have any questions in the meantime. And we look forward to seeing you guys again in January.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Guys.
Happy holidays.
Bye. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.